in a bustling city, filled with celebrations. The people are cheering loudly, as the air is filled with joy. A man in a suit of armor is seen riding on a horse, waving to the crowd. He was the hero of the people. The crowd shout hooray for the hero, as he rode past them. The town was called Iceguard. A child tells her brother to slow down. But he tells her to hurry up, as the parade is coming to an end. A figure appears in front of them, as the brother tells her that they should have rushed. The figure walks towards them, slowly walking by. The little girl asks her brother why he stopped walking, and turns to see what was beside them. She notices the figure carrying a sack, and whispers that the parade was over there, but her brother whispers to her, "Don't stare, idiot." Because that man was a dark mage. The little girl wondered about the dark mage, as they see him leave. Because he was cursed. A beautiful castle is standing on top of a cliff. A blonde lady is staring out the window. With her blue eyes she stares in the distance, until she heard a loud noise from behind. She turns to see that the dark mage had entered the room. She calls out to him saying his name, Minold. He drops a helmet with purple aura around it, saying this was the last threat to Isgard. But before she could thank him, he cuts her off, saying he wants her to fulfill the end of her promise. Right now, he said, but she remains silent. Before telling him she remembered the promise and not to worry. The dark mage shows his face, as she calls him Kim Minjun. They appear in front of a statue. The lady thanks Kim Minjun for his service, but he tells her he dislikes her so much, that he could die right now. So the lady asks him, if he really wishes to return to his original world. Kim Minjun tells her yes. And to return him right now, as she had used him too much. She lets out a sigh, saying she would give him immense treasures if he stayed, but Kim Minjun tells her to stop acting. But she tells him she was sincere, so he stood up, asking what she could give him. This baffled her, as he continues to tell her that she just wants to use him as a slave. What will you give me in return? He says, looking at her. She continues to tell him whatever he wanted, but he asks her to bring him Korean fried chicken and jokball. These words confused her more. He starts to insult her about all the services here, making her feel bad as she tells him they will improve those things. So he continues to ask for things from Earth, till she yells at him to ask her for stuff from Isgard. She finally gives up, and tells him to start the ceremony. So they arrive at the original summoning room. She tells him to stand in the same spot from where he was originally summoned. So he stands there as a spell appears below him. She tells him that she will remove the protection of the saint first. He removes his gloves and stares at his hand, thinking of that spell as a leash to restrict him from fighting that woman. He was happy to finally be released. So she removes it. But as she removes it, she asks him why he wanted to give up everything, but he tells her to mind her own business. And if she was worried he might kill her. But she tells him she will accept it if that happens. She finally removes the spell, asking him if he wants to kill her. If not, she will start the next part. But Kim Minjun just looks at his hand. He remains silent as she tells him she will take away his powers. But he starts to grin widely. A spell grabs her by the throat. Kim Minjun was holding her up in the air by the throat. She asks him why he was doing this. He tells her he won't give up his powers, as he had worked hard for it. He releases her from his spell. She turns to him wondering what he was planning to do. And something shocked her immensely. Kim Minjun was able to open a gate with dark magic. She tells him to stop as he cannot attempt dimensional travel rashly, but he knew. Telling her that he had practiced this for many years, as he had reached the peak of his power, this shocks her. But before he leaves, he tells her he had something to show her. I think it was a middle finger or to eat poop or something. He leaves through the gate as she tries to stop him. The gate releases a bright light as Kim Minjun finally leaves Isgard behind. The gate closes and slowly disappears in front of her. She slams her fist, saying if he thinks she enjoys this. We arrive in a place with modern buildings. As a light appears, shining brightly from within the room. Kim Minjun had appeared in the room. He breathes heavily, gasping for air, thinking about how hard it was for him to travel through dimensions. He grunts as he stands up, remaining silent, until he sees his phone on the table and grabs it. He had missed the feeling of a phone turning on a game that he knew. "I've finally returned from that hellhole," he shouts and laughs, while holding his phone. But a network error appears on his phone. Soldiers are seen running. They take cover behind a wall. The lead man asks the others if what they tracked was here. They argue about why the army sent regular men such as them here. The captain breathes heavily, signaling the others. They rush to move to their target, aiming his rifle to spot the target. But something alerts him. Kim Minjun was walking, thinking it's been 2 years since he was summoned, but currently had no internet to use in the neighborhood. He waves the phone around, wondering why the internet was down, and why a single store isn't open. The soldiers stare at him, wondering why a civilian was in a restricted zone. They call out to Minjun, asking him to walk to them. But he just stares at them, wondering why soldiers were in a civilian area. He believes that the training must have become more hardcore, and tells them sorry he was just passing through. But one of them yells at him, "Young man, run!" Kim Minjun wonders why as a huge wolf appears behind him. He turns slowly to see it. As the wolf leaps to him, he wonders why the stupid wolf was doing this, preparing his fist. He realizes something was wrong with his demonic energy and that it was gone. But he still smashes the wolf's head into the ground. Plot armor, lads. The soldiers are shocked to see this, as he calls it stupid. Kim Minjun kills it. Even without his demonic energy, he was still as strong, as he recalls the strength training he received in Isgard. But something was bothering him, as looks at the monster, wondering why it was on Earth. He stands up, turning to the soldiers as they tell him not to come close. Soon, he was in a military vehicle as someone tells him he could have gone to jail for doing that. The soldier asks him if he really didn't know what was going on, but Minjun tells him he was living abroad, because he thinks that this wasn't the Korean he used to know. Monsters appeared from when he was 7 years old. The appearance of dungeons meant there were superhumans called the Awakened, who were stronger than the average people, joined the Hunter Corps and wiped every monster. So when he was summoned by the Saint, Korean was in no danger. But Kim Minjun was curious if the game server was still online. If it's not, there was no point in his return. The soldier was still suspicious of him though. But he decides not to question because of what he did. Kim Minjun calls out to him, asking all kinds of questions about video games. So the soldier tells him everything he wanted to hear. He begins to explain why the situation got bad, and that it started 2 years ago because of a weird phenomenon. Dungeons started to appear more frequently. But the biggest problem was the increasing number of giant monsters. So because of that, the army couldn't resist, and since then they had come up with various methods to fight back, but they still lack members. Kim Minjun stares in disbelief. He only wanted to know about the game companies, thinking the soldier was a dunce. The soldier asks him what his age was. Kim Minjun tells him he was 21. He tells him that half his 20s will disappear due to the enlistment. Kim Minjun was surprised to learn that the enlistment period had increased to 5 years. He realizes this was trouble as he just wanted to play video games. But now he had to enlist for 5 years. A notification pings him. A message shows him his enlistment date and time. His enlistment day was tomorrow as the message came at impeccable timing. He yells at the soldier asking why there was no physical test before enlisting. The soldier tells him it was because of the lack of manpower, and that he should check at a PC cafe. Kim Minjun was happy to be back in a PC cafe. He reads a notice, and that his enlistment notice was real, thinking that he could clear all the dungeons if he had his demonic powers from Isgard. But for some reason, he had lost it all when he returned. He decides to just play a game, deciding to solve it by himself. The next day, at the National Defense Kim Minjun had arrived with many people around. He walks through the crowd with a snack in his mouth, thinking that everyone looked depressed. An announcement calls for everyone to gather, as Minjun wonders if the army was as tough as Isgard. A voice is shouting in the building telling cadets to stand up straight. Soldiers were yelling at the new recruits in the hall. They shout at the recruits, wondering why they weren't moving forward and not repeating their words. Kim Minjun was amazed at the instructors. He recalls Isgard's instructors hitting him for not responding, and that these instructors were nice. Kim Sang-soo calls everyone to attention. He tells them to raise their hands if they want to apply to the Hunter Corps, and that the pay is 3 million won at the start and that they would be treated differently. But no one had raised their hands. The commander was disappointed in seeing this, telling them not to worry. But a single hand was raised in the air. The instructor tells Kim Minjun to step forward. He braces into the ground, breaking it, and leaps from the crowd. The instructors look up in shock at Minjun. He lands loudly in front of the commander, telling him that Kim Minjun would like to apply to the Hunter Corps. Back in the northern region of Isgard called the Forgotten Canyon, deep within the mountains there is a cave. Kim Minjun was complaining about the Dark Mage job, how it was different from others because he needed to collect demonic energy from monsters, which is never efficient, unlike other mages. So he asks a question: what would be the best method for a dark mage to replenish their demonic energy and retain it? But no one replies to him. It was because everyone around him was already dead. Something appears with a heavy step, catching his attention. It was the hidden dungeon boss, Arachneist. It growls in anger, as Kim Minjun tells it why it came out so late as he was dying of boredom. Seeing its children all dead around him, the boss shrieks out loud. He looks at it, wondering if that was the answer to his question from before, but punches it in the face, telling it was the wrong answer. The boss' head was blown off in a single punch, as Kim Minjun reveals the answer: that you just needed to defeat a monster with maxed out strength. Back on Earth, Kim Minjun was invited into the office of the commander, telling him to wait here for the Hunter Corps to come. The commander tells him that he looked pretty enthusiastic and if he had any special reasons for applying to the Hunter Corps. He tells the commander he had a special interest in dungeons, which caused them to both be silent for a while. The commander and him both laughs, telling him he was pretty funny. But the actual fact was Kim Minjun was not joking. It was because the army was in charge of dungeons, making the Hunter Corps have first priority. They were a group of highly skilled individuals, who could advance in ranks as long as they proved their strength, allowing them to rank up multiple times in a short period of time. Kim Minjun believes that if he joins the Hunter Corps, he can clear most of the dungeons and get demonic energy, and while getting promoted fast in the ranks so he could recover his lost powers. He laughs and smiles thinking of that, as he plans on achieving high ranks to have a high salary and be a hero to the people as well. Someone knocks on the door. A member from the Hunter Corps had arrived. It was Sergeant Lee Sung-go. The commander tells him that Kim Minjun was the new recruit, as Minjun wondered why the commander was talking formally. Sung-ho asks Minjun if he really had powers. If so, he could open the status window and to tell him all his stats. Minjun was annoyed at him but was familiar with the status window, as he used it back in Isgard. He calls out to the status window, but is disturbed to see what came out. Sung-ho tells him to hurry up and tell him what he sees. But Minjun hesitated to answer back to him, as he slowly tells him that there was an error with his status window. Sung-ho was getting mad at him, thinking he was messing with him. We arrive at the Hunter Corps training center. The battalion commander greets someone, saying it has been 10 years since he last saw the person. It was Hunter Sun Yunseo. He tells her to take a seat first, but she tells him she was a recruit, and that she didn't need special treatment because of her father, during her training period. But he laughs at what she says, telling her that this was for a different matter. She blushes as he tells her that the Hunter Corps is not an easy organization, and would not give special treatment to anyone. He just wanted to give her a few words of encouragement, as she was a renowned rookie that enlisted. He thanks her for choosing to be a soldier instead of an executive, as few made the same choice. She thanks him for the encouragement, but still felt embarrassed. He notices a vehicle approaching the training center, telling her that he received a funny report earlier, and that she will be getting an interesting comrade, asking her if she wanted to visit him together. We arrive at another building, guys. Kim Minjun looks up, amazed by the place. He looks around, wondering how much money they spent on the facility, as it was no joke. Sung-ho tells him not to get excited, and that he would test him personally because he was a special case. Based on orders from the head office, Minjun was mad at how he talked to him. He continues to tell Minjun that the test will reveal he was a liar and he would be sent to the military police. Minjun thinks of him as being stingy and asks what was the test. Sung-ho taps on a red rock, saying it was this. If he manages to move this even an inch, he will pass. 10 minutes was given for the test. The red stone was created from dungeons. It is incredibly dense and heavy for its size, and very hard. At this size, a recruit would not be able to move it. Minjun walks past him, saying the test was too simple. Sung-ho thinks of Minjun as one of the trash people who tried to take advantage of the Hunter Corps with weak skills. Thinking back to when Minjun leapt 5 meters in the air to the podium, it was bullshit, he thought. The commander and Sun Yunseo had arrived. He explains to her that Minjun showed great physical strength but had an error when opening the status window. Further telling her he had never seen such a case before, and had high hopes on this unique person. Minjun looks at the red stone, thinking that he saw it strewn all around Isgard dungeons, and was a ridiculously heavy mineral. But he smiles, as he knows that this size, he can easily push it away. Swinging his fist back. The commanders and Sun Yunseo looked confused at what he was doing. But Minjun wanted to strike it, thinking there might be demonic energy inside it. Slamming his fist straight into it, causing a loud sound to be heard. Smashing the red stone into multiple pieces. He laughs, saying it was too bad there wasn't any inside as pieces of the red stone fly everywhere. What a monstrous bastard, Sergeant Lee thought to himself, completely shocked by Jun's prowess. The first day of training begins with recruits Nam, Hayek, and the rest clearly struggling. They are running up the stairs, and Hayek's internal thoughts are scattered due to fatigue. He realizes that training wouldn't be ordinary, even before enlisting in the Hunter Corps. Trying his hardest to maintain his strength while climbing the infamous 6,000 steps, he knows he must train intensely for 4 weeks before participating in actual battles. From the very first training session, they weigh themselves down with sandbags and climb the notorious steps. Hayek, obviously not having a great time, refers to the instructor who keeps checking their finishing times. This instructor is none other than Sergeant Lee Sumo, known as the Devil Instructor. Despite enduring the harsh training, Hayek realizes that it only increases their stats slightly before being thrust into battle. Meanwhile, Jun is having the time of his life during the training, effortlessly progressing. He feels light on his feet and loves the simplicity compared to his experiences in dungeon dwelling. Wearing the military uniform of the Hunter Corps suits him perfectly, and he relishes the food served in the mass hall. The recruits follow a strict routine, waking up at 6 a.m., having breakfast at 8:30 a.m., and training until lunch. Afternoon training continues until dinner, but the most cherished aspect for Jun is the free time at night. Inside the facility, there's a PC room where they can indulge in gaming or any other activities during their free time. It's like living his dream, getting paid, being well fed, and having time to exercise and play games. As Jun rushes up the stairs with great excitement, the others stare at him, perplexed by his speed and energy. At the top of the 6,000 steps, Sergeant Lee stands, hearing the rapid footsteps and seeing Jun approaching. Kim and Jun, who is this guy? It usually takes an average recruit at least 1 hour to climb the steps. How has he done it so quickly? Sergeant Lee wonders silently. However, Jun seems disappointed and questions the sergeant about an outing pass mentioned earlier. When he confirms that they would receive an outing pass if they finish in less than 30 minutes, Jun receives his pass without further response from the sergeant. Contemplating where to use the pass, June becomes the first recruit ever to achieve such a feat, finishing in a record-breaking 21 minutes, 1 second, and 43 milliseconds. High stats and strength alone aren't everything in the Hunter Corps. The most crucial aspect is the ability to react to monsters. Sergeant Lee begins to see the potential in June and decides to pay close attention to him from then on. In the common room, the recruits have existential crises, worrying about the continuation of strict training regimens. Hayek, excited by his improved stats, congratulates June, causing excitement among the other recruits. They all start checking their stats through the status window, while June wonders why they're getting so excited over a single stat point. He recalls his training days in Iskard, where his stats would increase by 10 each day through intense physical beatings. Other recruits engage in conversation, asking June about his outing pass and expressing admiration for his effortless climb up the stairs. Feeling valued and accepted by others, something he had never experienced in Iskard, June appreciates the communication and enjoys the camaraderie. Hearing about the PC room being open, June bursts with energy and rushes towards it, eager to indulge in gaming. With 2 other recruits, he spends time in the PC room, feeling more satisfied than ever before. Looking at the time, 9 p.m., June realizes that he'll get at least 2 hours of sleep after gaming, a luxury compared to his maximum 1 hour of sleep in Iskard. As June immerses himself in the game, the other recruits in the room stare at him, wondering why he's still playing that particular game. While the training continues, Sergeant Lee focuses on training the soldiers to run consistently at a maintained speed. The recruits appear exhausted, but they persevere. Sergeant Lee threatens that those unable to complete 40 kilometers in 2 hours will not receive breakfast. Meanwhile, June showcases his abilities, sharing that he achieved 10 max levels the day before and feeling no fatigue after the run. When asked about his lack of sweat, June casually explains that it was merely a stroll for him. A recruit questions if he spent every night playing games except for the 2 hours of sleep, considering him a monster. June jokingly spills water, causing the recruits to gather around like baby birds being fed in a nest. The recruits' lack of enthusiasm disappoints Sergeant Lee, who screams for attention. He expresses his disappointment in their frailty, stating that half of them won't survive a month after deployment. With a grim expression, he announces the final stage of training, known as the dungeon adjustment. Explaining the concept of transforming dungeons, he describes how they become a great training facility where recruits face various environments. The dungeon adjustment is notorious for its extreme difficulty, and the recruits are scared. However, the lieutenant prefers maintaining tension, handling recruits like racehorses, disciplining them when necessary and rewarding them appropriately. The lieutenant announces that the recruit with the highest score from this training will receive a 2-night, 3-day vacation pass. To his surprise, the recruits' reactions are dull, except for our protagonists, who couldn't be happier about the vacation opportunity. Finally, the time comes for the dreaded dungeon training to begin. The recruits are astonished by the colossal dungeon gate before them. Suddenly, an army truck nearly runs them over, stopping abruptly and stirring up dirt. The recruits then witness a group of creatures with luminous eyes confined in cages. The eyes behind the bars of the cage glared with growls that sent shivers down the recruits' spines. As their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they saw beasts with large fangs and furry skin. The cage was filled with hounds, but these were not your regular hounds. They were a bloodthirsty and absolutely terrifying breed. 2 recruits quickly sought refuge behind Kim and June, while another fell to the ground in fear. However, Minjun found them amusing and saw them as equivalent to tiny puppies, devoid of any fear. The lieutenant screamed at the recruits, questioning their fear of the hounds. He informed them that these monsters would be the adversaries they would face in the transforming dungeon during their training. This further heightened the recruits' terror. The lieutenant instructed them to form teams of 4 before entering the transforming dungeon. Their goal was to defeat at least one monster and safely make their way back out to prove their worth as valuable future soldiers to the Hunter Corps. After a brief pep talk, the lieutenant directed them to gear up, indicating they would receive special armor for the mission. Each recruit was asked to proceed one by one and pick up their Hunter Corps exclusive safety suit, also known as the Mid-2. The suit resembled a shining piece of silver armor with a tough and heavy exterior, akin to a steel chassis. However, its sole purpose was to protect its wearer. While roughly made and rigid, it was also incredibly heavy. Some recruits expressed skepticism, wondering if the Hunter Corps could have provided them with something stronger. Minjun shared their sentiment, finding the armor unpleasant due to its repeated use by previous soldiers. As the armor had cost around 50 million Korean currency to make, he requested permission from the lieutenant to remove it quickly upon defeating the hounds. The lieutenant, a stern figure, dismissed the recruit's arrogance without realizing who had asked the question. Upon recognizing it was Minjun, he reluctantly granted him permission. The lieutenant reminded Minjun of the team training nature of the transformative dungeon, emphasizing the need to prioritize the safety and success of the entire team. Minjun, aware of the other recruits' lack of competence, devised a plan to teach his teammates how to defeat the hounds. He explained that when the hounds leaped to attack, they should grab their legs and snap their backs. If that didn't prove fatal, they should fold their backs in the opposite direction and rip them apart. Minjun's face radiated excitement as he shared the gruesome details of his plan, but his fellow recruits appeared unamused and tired of his cockiness. Ignoring their expressions, the lieutenant commanded the release of the hounds from the cage, and they immediately bounded out, growling and drooling with ferocity. Their sparkling white eyes had a blinding effect on anyone who looked into them. Astonishingly, the hounds bypassed the recruits and made a beeline for the dungeon, leaving the recruits bewildered. Minjun clarified that the hounds recognized their home and instinctively gravitated towards it, having been captured for a while. Understanding this, the recruits pondered how Minjun possessed such deep insight into the psychology of the monsters. However, Minjun yearned to share his experiences in Isgard and reveal that he used to be a dark mage. Yet, he understood he couldn't divulge this information at the moment. The lieutenant reprimanded the recruits for laughing and joking during the holy training rounds, prompting them to brush off the conversation. However, the lieutenant decided that Minjun's team would be the first to enter the dungeon. With the wave of his red lightsaber-like signaling device, the sergeant instructed the team to enter the dungeon. The four boys commenced their walk toward the depths of the dungeon. One among them wore a determined expression, while the other two seemed deeply worried about the future. Minjun, on the other hand, was simply thrilled to finally get things started and couldn't wait to remove the heavy and dirty chest plate that burdened him. The only commonality among the four was their prominent ears. The lieutenant picked up his radio and contacted the instructor team waiting inside the transformative dungeon in case of any unforeseen danger. The observer responded, confirming the team's entry, while spectating alongside a corporal from a concealed spot within the crystallized walls. Among the instructors on protection duty, the devil instructor, whom all the recruits despised, was surprised by Minjun's presence, wondering about his prowess. Minjun had consistently scored well during training and demonstrated commendable performance over the 4 weeks. The question on the instructor's mind was whether Minjun would continue to excel in the dungeon. As Kim, Minjun, and their team ventured deeper into the dungeon, the bloodthirsty hound eyes watched from the crevices in the walls, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Minjun, seemingly aware of their presence, contemplated how to dispatch them effortlessly with a flick on their foreheads. However, he realized he couldn't complete the exercise alone, as it was a team effort. His teammates needed to contribute to earn stat points. Minjun warned his team that the hounds were about to attack, but their surprise overwhelmed their ability to react, and they began screaming in fear. Taking the lead, Minjun stepped forward as one of the hounds rushed toward him. He swiftly dodged to the side and landed a punch on the hound's head, instantly killing the creature. Meanwhile, another recruit was pounced on and bitten by a hound, locking eyes with Minjun as he screamed for help. Minjun rushed to his aid, kicking the hound away, causing it to collide with a wall and meet its demise. Minjun assisted the wounded recruit and realized the situation was more dire than he initially thought. Assuming the role of a battle instructor, Minjun explained that they must fight back to avoid being overwhelmed by the hounds. He emphasized that the hounds would perceive their fear and consider them easy prey if they didn't retaliate. With their numerical advantage, the recruits could overpower the hounds. Shouting instructions, Minjun directed his fellow recruits to put pressure on the remaining hound, and together, they attacked with Minjun guiding their actions. Hidden instructors within the dungeon's crevices were shocked to witness this display, observing Minjun's attitude and exceptional leadership skills, leaving them wide-eyed and baffled. The recruits overwhelmed the hound, bringing it down. The instructors began to formulate conspiracy theories, wondering if Minjun was a secret instructor deployed without their knowledge. They analyzed the team's scores, with Minjun inevitably scoring the highest due to his physical strength and leadership abilities. While the rest of Minjun's squad would likely receive average scores, the squad celebrated and breathed a sigh of relief, knowing they had conquered their most daunting challenge thus far. The instructors emerged from their hiding spots, commending the recruits on their performance and instructing them to follow back to the exit. Curiosity piqued, Minjun questioned the presence of the instructors and teased them about his expectations of receiving a vacation pass or a high score. He playfully remarked on their apparent concern for the recruits while maintaining a tough exterior. The light-hearted banter continued as they made their way toward the gate. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to shake violently, causing alarm among the recruits, who feared it might be an earthquake. Minjun reassured them, explaining that the transforming dungeon was undergoing its transformation process and that there was nothing to worry about. However, the instructors started to panic, and the recruits were astounded as they witnessed the dungeon's entrance door shrinking before their eyes. The recruits also begin to panic as the dungeon door closes. The instructors try to contact the lieutenant through their radio, but it seems the radio is dead due to the dungeon transforming too fast. They had over a month before the internal structure of the dungeon would change, but this unexpected occurrence significantly altered the situation. The instructors decide not to dwell on the current issue and lead the recruits to a safe space to wait it out. They explain the situation to the new recruits, who are terrified and on the verge of panic. The instructors assure them that they will wait for an hour to see if the door opens, as stated in their manual. They comfort the recruits, who breathe a sigh of relief upon hearing that the Hunter Corps is likely assessing the situation from the outside and that the lieutenant will take the necessary steps to ensure their safety. However, Minjun suspects that the instructors are trying to keep the recruits calm because they wouldn't have conducted training exercises here if they had known about unexpected situations like this. He understands that this is an extraordinary occurrence, and an enclosed dungeon with a closed exit is an ominous sign. Minjun ponders if the dungeon has transformed into an enclosed dungeon, which would make defeating the monsters within more challenging. Meanwhile, the instructors attempt to discuss their situation privately. In a secluded area, one instructor informs the other that the dungeon has indeed transformed into an enclosed dungeon. The revelation surprises the other instructor, who, despite being part of the renowned Hunter Corps, was unaware of this fact. The instructor proceeds to explain the workings of an enclosed dungeon, where it only occurs when an outsider enters, triggering the transformation. The only way to escape the enclosed dungeon is by defeating every single monster inside. Now, our heroes face several challenges, battling through a maze-like dungeon filled with monsters, with no external assistance available. The instructors inform the recruits about the situation, which increases their tension. With only 4 recruits and 2 instructors, they must navigate the dungeon independently, unaware of which monsters they will encounter. Unfortunately, the instructors are ill-equipped to handle an enclosed dungeon, but they must make do with their limited resources and continue moving forward. The head instructor realizes that even encountering a goblin would pose a significant threat, as it would take at least 10 minutes for him to defeat one. He contemplates utilizing the protective suits worn by the recruits as a defense, positioning them at the front while the recruits attempt to defeat the monsters. However, he wrestles with a sense of responsibility towards the recruits, considering the rigorous training they have undergone and the trust they have placed in him. Putting them in harm's way feels unfair. He dismisses the plan, unwilling to compromise their safety. Despite their fear, the recruits muster their courage and follow their instructors. However, Minjun senses something amiss and observes one of the instructors closely. the head instructor notices Minjun's concern and inquires about the situation. Suddenly, everyone's attention turns to the other instructor, who struggles to breathe and clutches his throat. He collapses to the floor, foam frothing from his mouth. Alarmed, the head instructor rushes to his aid but succumbs to the same symptoms, falling unconscious. Foam continues to emanate from their mouths. Kim Minjun rushes to check on the instructors and reassures the recruits that it's not a severe condition, they have merely fainted. Recognizing a familiar scent, he swiftly picks up the instructors and instructs the recruits to catch them. He entrusts the care of the instructors to his comrades, cautioning them not to follow him. He orders the recruits to remain near the exit, refraining from venturing elsewhere. Despite their protests, Minjun proceeds deeper into the dungeon, his anticipation growing. In his internal monologue, Minjun explains the reason behind the instructors' collapse: they were exposed to demonic energy. Unexpectedly finding such energy on Earth excites him, as it serves as a power source for dark mages like himself. As he ventures further into the dungeon, he detects the source of the dense demonic energy, heightening his enthusiasm. However, as he reaches the closest possible proximity, he discovers an empty void, devoid of any sights or sounds. Only the glow of purple crystals illuminates the enclosed dungeon. Perplexed, he searches for signs of monsters but finds none. Yet, the scent of the demonic energy leads him upward, and there, he spots a formidable opponent, a massive alpha hound radiating intense purple demonic energy. With its 4 gleaming purple eyes and menacing teeth and claws, it presents a worthy challenge that Minjun has longed for. Remembering his encounter with a dark hound during his early days in Iskard, Minjun recognizes the creature before him. Back then, he faced the terrifying beast while underprepared, nearly meeting his demise. But now, he is a seasoned dark mage and hunter, ready to confront the dark hound head-on with unwavering confidence. The creature lunges at him from the ceiling, but Minjun retaliates with a powerful punch, reminiscent of his training. The impact sends the dark hound hurtling through the air, as Minjun thanks it for the meal. The monster meets its demise. However, he soon realizes that the scent of blood was still sickening. Demonic energy was being released into the air. Minjun focuses his hand and talks about the immense amount of demonic energy that spills out after the monster's death, which made dark hounds hard to defeat. And because of its venomous blood, when normal humans came into contact with it, their skin would begin to rot. The demonic energy in the air started to gather and surge towards Minjun. His hand was seen slowly absorbing the demonic energy into his body. But Minjun smiles while absorbing the demonic energy, as all the problems that normal humans had with the dark hounds did not apply to dark mages. Minjun thought about how excited he felt when absorbing demonic energy for the first time after such a long time. He believes that his powers had been charged to at least 5%. But as he continued to absorb the demonic energy, he thought about how a dark hound that was normally found in Iskard was doing in a place such as this. Minjun had previously considered that it would be possible for monsters on Earth to harbor demonic energy, but based on the instructor's reaction from before, there was also no mention of demonic energy or dark hounds during the monster education at the training center either, which makes the possibility of the dark hound managing dimensional travel on its own non-existent, as it can only be done by someone like Minjun who had reached the peak of dark magic powers, or by a saint who can utilize God's powers, an ability that cannot be used by anyone. Minjun soon finishes absorbing the demonic energy and wondered if he was overthinking something that was actually minor. He stands above the purple glowing stones, looking for the dark hound's corpse as he needed to make a report. And soon finds it below him. In the present, the instructor wakes up to the voices of the young recruits. He opens his eyes, hearing the panic in their voices. They stare at him, concerned about the instructor's well-being. The instructor immediately jumps up, causing the recruits to be scared. Both of the instructors soon woke up and asked them if they were all right and about what had happened. The recruit explained that Minjun delved deeper into the dungeon alone, shocking the instructors, and they soon told the whole story to the instructors. The instructors are furious and in disbelief at Minjun's actions. One of them grabs the recruit's shoulders and shakes him furiously. The instructor is in complete shock, unable to believe that Minjun would behave in such a way. He thinks Minjun should be immediately expelled from the academy. However, he acknowledges that he doesn't have the authority to make that decision at the moment, especially since he fainted instead of ensuring the recruit's safety. Just as the instructor contemplates going out to save Minjun, one of the recruits tells him to look to the other side of the cave. Minjun has returned, carrying the corpse of the monster he killed on his back. He also asked if everyone was alright. The instructors are shocked once again by the sight. They also noticed that it looked a bit different from the usual ones. Minjun tosses it in front of them and tells them to take a look at this son of a bitch. They examine the monster's body and realize it is the creature that caused them to faint. The recruits, too, are in disbelief and wonder how Minjun managed to defeat such a massive monster, noting that the ones they had defeated were light class while the one Minjun defeated was a heavy one. Minjun looks toward the cave's entrance and sees that the portal gate has opened. The instructor puts his hand on Minjun's shoulder and asks him if he truly defeated the hound on his own. Minjun nods, and the instructor acknowledges his achievement. The lead instructor orders the other instructor to lead the recruits out of the dungeon and that he will follow them shortly. Alone in front of the portal gate as the others left first, the instructor instructs Minjun to detail everything in a report once he got outside and to submit it to the lieutenant. He removes his hat stating that he should not leave anything out including the instructor's incompetence. Covering his face with his hand he tells Minjun that they had fainted and left the recruits by themselves. The instructors had no excuse even if they were to be sent to military prison. Minjun agrees and promises to include every detail, not omitting anything. The instructor thanks Minjun for ensuring everyone's safety and expresses his appreciation. Minjun blushes, glad to be of help but felt slightly embarrassed by the compliments. The instructor puts his hat back on, attempting to salvage his dignity, and mentions accepting his mistakes as a man. He says they should return as they leave the cave through the portal gate, which is emanating blue lights. The instructor wonders how to report the cause of his unconsciousness, meaning it would be hard for him to sleep tonight. Meanwhile, Minjun is ecstatic, having received compliments from his comrades and instructors. He feels it's a good day for him. As he is about to leave the dungeon through the portal gate, a notification window pops up, stating that the error has been fixed. Minjun is frustrated by the error, wondering what the error even was anyway, but dismisses it as something ridiculous and calls it a stupid system, similar to the one in the other world he came from. The window shows Minjun's stats, revealing the title of Luminuna is my favorite character cult founder. He has 60 points in strength, agility, and stamina, along with 10 points in demonic energy and an E-ranking possessed skill called corruption. However, something strange catches his attention. According to the window, he is the founder of a cult named Luminuna, which embarrasses him. He had created it in his previous world based on a character from Dungeon Power Fighter. When he had reached the peak of his dark powers, he created the cult in order to deter stalkers and annoyances, but only ended up with more stalkers and fanatics. He looks at the window stats and realizes that he had become significantly weaker, as his stats were much worse than he expected. He suspected that after his return, he noticed that all his demonic energy was gone, which was expected due to the dimensional travel penalty, but he was angry with the fact that from his endless list of skills, only one remained, and its rank was insanely low. He knew that the effect of corruption was probably a stomachache. Minjun compares his situation to a third-rate novel where the hero is sent back to level 1, which was absurd that he wanted to vomit. Minjun looks flustered as he couldn't reach any of his objectives at this rate. Despite this setback, his confidence remains unshaken, as he had still managed to reach the peak of his dark magic powers in Isgard, and since he did it once before, it wouldn't be impossible to do it again. A tall building is seen just as Minjun thought of his objective to recover his powers as soon as possible for the sake of the game company that has development delays due to monsters. Minjun states that it's doable, and heads to exit from the portal knowing that it was nothing compared to the times in Isgard when he couldn't do anything but endure. The scene switches to the chaotic training center, which was in utter chaos, due to the fact that a dungeon gate was closed while training was in session and that the lieutenant had not given clear orders, plus the fact that a mere recruit managed to defeat a new species of monster while the instructors were not able to do anything. Because of these events, the recruits were not able to get their private ranks or their freedom until dispatch. The recruits were now in their bunks and are confused about their status. The lack of clear instructions, the closed dungeon gate, and Minjun's solo adventure have caused disorder. The recruits are annoyed that they don't have the freedom to enjoy their time until they are dispatched. They discuss Minjun's achievement of capturing a huge hound on his own, pondering if he could achieve the rank of sergeant within 2 years. However, some doubt it, knowing the difficulty of the Hunter Corps exams. In the battalion commander's office, Minjun salutes and introduces himself to the commander. The commander salutes back and tells him to come in with a happy face, but Minjun sees the instructor on the ground. The commander then tells the instructor that he could leave now. The commander tells Minjun that an instructor who doesn't check dungeons should be punished, to which Minjun agrees with. The command then decides to cut the formalities and tells him that he called Minjun because he had something to tell him. As he sat in his chair, the commander tells him that he had a special proposal and wondered if Minjun would like to hear it. A crane and a flock of chickens, it is an idiom used to describe someone outstanding. The commander looks at Minjun thinking that he truly was no ordinary human and that he was lucky to have lived long enough to see such a sight. Who knew there would be a crane that makes even those above average seem like chickens? The commander continues to think that it would be a national loss if such a talent were to join the regular ranks, and that they are in need of additional personnel. The commander then goes on to tell Minjun that he knew about how he wanted to advance as soon as possible, but according to their rules, privates cannot take promotion exams for another year. But if granted an exception, it would be a different story. Hearing this made Minjun jolt up. The commander suggests Minjun join the Hunter Corps in Chorwon of Gangwon-do, while offering to use his authority to grant him an exception to take the promotion exams earlier. He slams his hands on the table, telling him if he went there, he wouldn't have to wait for another year. But there was an awkward silence between them. The commander nervously thinks that Chorwon might be too much of a stretch even if he's desperate to advance, and thinks that the promotion exception isn't enough for him. Minjun considers the proposal, understanding that the 104th Division, called the Invincible Hunter Squad, was a place his comrades had told him to avoid at all costs. The weather there would be freezing with snow constantly falling and piling up a lot, and that it would be boring as the dungeons and monsters appear there out of the blue, as well as it was considered to be the most extreme out of the front lines. But Minjun thought of it as being great. He thinks about how he could advance meant that it didn't matter where he deployed, and if granted a promotion exception, it would be amazing. On top of that, they had lots of dungeons which were the best conditions for him. In order for Minjun's plan to work, he needed to advance at all costs. The higher the rank, the greater his scope of activities, which meant obviously that there was no greater way to get a promotion than to accomplish stuff in dungeons. Minjun then tells the commander that he would go. The commander was stunned for a moment from hearing his reply, but Minjun shouts with conviction that he would go to Chorwon. Outside the Hunter Corps Training Center, Minjun bids farewell to his friend Roka, who is saddened by their separation. He tells him to contact him once he got to the base, but Minjun reminded him that he wouldn't do it. Roka then wipes the snot and tears off his face, asking Minjun why he wanted to go to the place where everyone wants to avoid. Minjun smiles at him and tells him that he had an insane goal in life. Roka wondered if it was to achieve max level 100 times, but Minjun brags that he had already reached his 13th and that 100 was no big deal. Roka calls him freaking crazy. Soon Roka left and Minjun waved him goodbye. Minjun then takes note that the loudest person on base had already left, and wondered why he was alone by himself. A military truck soon arrives in front of him. A voice calls out, calling Minjun's name. Minjun is joined by Kim Minji, a muscular man who will accompany him to Chorwon, and asks if he waited long as they were late because of the snow. Minjun was confused by the snow and wonders what month it was to be snowing. Minji then turns around in a military fashion, telling Minjun to get in the back so they could depart for the squad. Minjun sees him and thought of him as a show-off. As Minjun sat at the back of the truck, he thought about how he was actually going to start his life as a soldier when they got to base. But it didn't matter to him if the training was hard or if he had to battle monsters frequently. But there was one thing he was worried about: hazing. He thought about how he would end up in miserable situations like the ones that happen in various shows, and with a gloomy look he knew that he lacked the patience to put up with anything like that right now. But he closes his eyes knowing that he has to endure it for now. As the truck passes through a bridge, Minjun notes that if he hits a superior even once, he might be sent to the military prison as a regular soldier. They soon reach the entrance of the Invincible Hunter Corps. As they walk through the headquarters halls, Minjun is shoved into a room by Minji and is surrounded by other soldiers. two of the soldiers exclaimed at the sight of Minjun calling him a newbie, asking about his achievements and expressing admiration. They took his bag and threw it at another soldier telling him to unpack it. Minjun realizes that these soldiers are the alphas of the squad and that they were looking at him like they discovered a new toy. They soon asked Minjun why he chose to come here. Minjun then tells them he came here as he heard that the front line was the best place to gain real experience and was the fastest way to advance. The two alphas were stunned to hear that, but soon laughed and called him crazy. Then they berate him with multiple questions about his personal life and asked to see his talent. Minjun then thinks about showing his talent so they could F off. He tells the alphas that he could show them one-finger push-ups. The red-hair alpha was mad at this and shouted what kind of talent that was, as they could do that shit all day, while the other alpha tells him not to get angry and to just let Minjun show them. Their faces soon turn to shock as they see something, a finger pressing on the ground. They see Minjun balancing himself with just one finger on the ground while standing upright. The alphas were shocked that Minjun could do a vertical one-finger push-up, and they argue amongst themselves about whether there was anyone else that could do the same thing. Another solider appears, with his eyes glowing red. He tells Minjun to get lost. The two alphas called him no fun, while Minjun turns to see who it was as he recognizes the voice. It was Sergeant Lee Sung-ho. Sergeant Sung-ho, Minjun's previous instructor, appears in the dormitory. The two alphas made fun of him because he had earned a vacation for tormenting kids and wondered how many days he got this time, but he shouts at them and told them he had gotten 4 days and to stop pestering him and leave him alone. The two alphas decided to leave while calling him a party pooper and pointed the middle at him. Seeing as they left, Sung-ho mentions that they were pissing him off and that he couldn't beat them up. While Minjun thought to himself that they finally left, Sung-ho then lays on the ground and takes out his handphone watching a video. The video was explaining that the volcanic dungeons have a naturally high temperature which causes damage. While the other soldiers sat upright, Minjun thought to himself that even in their tiny space, the difference in ranks was vast and it wasn't like they were in the 80s. Sung-ho then calls out to Dong-jin, who reports himself to Sung-ho. He then instructs Dong-jin that since Minjun was his direct junior he had to make sure to instruct him properly. Dong-jin then introduces himself to Minjun, who wondered if this guy was his senior. Dong-jin then whispers to Minjun if he wanted to talk over some food as he had gotten a special permit to visit the PX. The PX stands for Post Exchange, which was a type of retail store found in military installations. Minjun was shocked to hear that they couldn't go to a PX as they wanted. They soon arrive at the PX where Dong-jin tells him to pick out whatever he wanted to eat. Minjun then warns him that he eats a lot. Dong-jin smiles and assures Minjun that he was serious and wanted him to pick and eat as much as he likes. Minjun thinks of him as a nice guy. They soon brought over a basket filled with food where the cashier tells them it costs 300,000 won. Dong-jin was shaking as he hands over his card, to which the cashier asks him if he was feeling cold as he was shaking so much. They soon sat down, and Minjun began to eat the food while asking Dong-jin about why they couldn't use the PX on a regular basis, and about the special permit he mentioned earlier. Dong-jin then explains to him that private first class and below could only go onto the PX on weekends, and that he needed to be a private first class or above to use gyms and at least a corporal to use PC rooms. Minjun was shocked to hear that only corporals and above could use PC rooms and thought of it as being insane. Dong-jin continues to explain that it was unreasonable, but it was something that a private first class like him couldn't resolve and advises Minjun to just get used to it. Minjun then asks him if there was any way to change that rule. Dong-jin tells him that he would need to advance at least to the rank of a corporal, but changes his mind and states that he needed the rank of sergeant to even attempt it, and that it won't be easy. Minjun was annoyed to hear that as they knew that he couldn't flip shit here, and wondered if there was no other way to advance in ranks. Dong-jin scratches his ear and tells Minjun that it was no easy task to become a sergeant in the Hunter Corps, and that he himself had failed the advancement exam many times and has been a private first class for 3 years old already. Pathetic, right? He asks Minjun, but Minjun tells him it wasn't and promised him that he will make sure that he advances next time, thinking that if he gets promoted quickly he could bring Dong-jin with him. Dong-jin smiles and thanks Minjun for the encouragement, when suddenly a young man appears behind Dong-jin asking if Minjun was the new recruit. It was Corporal Gwangshik. Dong-jin then offers their meal to him nervously, which Gwangshik didn't refuse. He then happily eats the snacks of Minjun and Dong-jin. Minjun stares at him thinking that he was a weirdo that appeared once Dong-jin was done talking. With his mouth stuffed with food, Guangxik warns them that if they both suck at firearms training tomorrow, they were both dead, as he wouldn't let them go easily even if Minjun was new here. He then asks Minjun if he knew how to shoot. Jin cuts in and tells him that he was just about to explain the firearms training to him. Guangxik burps and scolds Jin for indicating that he was overstepping his boundaries again. Guangxik then went on to make fun of Jin for still being a private first class. Hearing him make fun of Jin caused Minjun to be angry, as he thinks of Guangxik as a bastard and a pain in the ass. He knew that he couldn't hold back any longer and started to cast his skill on him using his hand. Demonic energy soon crept towards Guangxik from underneath the table as Minjun wanted him to spit out what he just ate. A sudden painful feeling overcame Guangxik as he was talking. He immediately stood up from the table, causing Jin to ask what was wrong. While Minjun was smiling happily, Guangxik begins to look at all the food items he ate, making Minjun think that he was looking for the expiration dates. Guangxik then tells them it was nothing and that they should get back soon. Guangxik then leaves them behind holding his stomach, wondering if the food had gone bad. Minjun smiles at him, leaving thinking that even his E-rank corruption skill was useful at times. He then turns to Jin to ask about the firearms training he was talking about. Jin then asks him if he had fired a KX-2 with ICM bullets before, and tells him that the Hunter Corps uses bullets with even higher power than those. He explains that the ICM bullets used at the training center were equivalent to a pony, but the Hunter Corps version were like a wild stallion, as the recoil was completely different, as it sounds as if you're firing a cannon. Jin further explains that since monsters appear far more frequently here, the firepower is much more important, but assures Minjun that it might feel pretty awkward at the beginning, but he just needed to be ready to get scolded once and not worry about it. Minjun thinks about how the pony and wild stallion was a fitting comparison, but then he thought about how the long-range weapons in Isgard would be equivalent to an elephant, but Minjun was more than happy with just a wild stallion. Minjun smiles happily as he was looking forward to tomorrow. Soldiers are seen marching in the cold forest. Gunshots are heard at the firearms training facility. A soldier is seen firing at a target. The target was shown to be destroyed with its head gone. Minjun was feeling upset that he had missed one shot. Another soldier waves a red flag saying that shooting was complete and there were 19 direct hits with one miss. The two alphas and others were shocked to hear that. The other soldiers talked amongst themselves about how well Minjun shot and wondered if he was a shooting machine or just had dumb luck. The red-hair alpha tells the other one that his best score was 14, which was above average for the squad. Two figures are seen in a watchtower. It was Second Lieutenant Kim Kielman and First Sergeant Hyo Tae-sik who commented on Minjun's incredible score and figured that the rumors were true. The two alphas asked Minjun how he shot like that, but he simply replies that he just did as he was told. Min-ji appears and tells Minjun he did well and that he wants him to continue showing them his best. He then informs Minjun about seeing him shoot at this afternoon's special firearms training, which causes Minjun to wonder about what special firearms training was. The two alphas were surprised to hear that Minjun was going to special firearms training. The other soldiers praised Minjun was his good shooting and Minjun thanks them. He then asks Jin what was so special about the special firearms training, as he didn't hear much about it. Jin apologizes to Minjun as he didn't expect him to be such a good shooter. He explains that new recruits were normally exempt from special firearms training since they needed to take a while to get used to their ICM bullets. Jin then decides to give a short explanation. The special firearms training consists of two-person team entering the training facility and eliminating the monsters en route to the destination. Although the monsters weren't highly dangerous, they will have to deal with moving targets, and must be ready to counter their attacks. Another thing they need to watch out for was the civilian target plates that pop up every now and then, as hitting any one of them results in an automatic failure no matter how many monsters they defeat. Jin then assures him that there was no need to be scared when facing real monsters, as the executives will be controlling the situation. Minjun's face was filled with excitement at the thought of meeting live monsters during the shooting. After the firing test, we see the group of soldiers enjoying lunch. It is bountiful, with lots of different dishes to choose from. Jin is completely shocked at the fact that Minjun managed to hit 19 shots at the target and tells him that he was born to be a soldier, while Minjun compliments Jin for hitting 13 shots of his own. Jin mentions that he has had some experience but is not very good. On the other hand, he believes that Sergeant Lee Sung-ho is one of the best soldiers he's ever seen. On average, Sergeant Lee shoots at least 17 shots, which makes him the #1 shooter in the whole squad. While eating, Minjun listens to this and acknowledges that since the squad's average is 10 hits, Sergeant Lee is much better than the rest. However, he also realizes that he is officially the #1 shooter now. Banjin then gives our hero a word of encouragement, saying he's sure that Minjun will do great in the special firearms training. Minjun asks him about what had told him before that there would be 2-person teams, and asks him if he wanted to join him. Dongjin declines and tells him that the executives will be deciding the teams and that he couldn't guarantee anything, which means they never know who they're going to be paired with, which makes Minjun curious. He asks what the method and criteria are to decide on teams. Dongjin begins going into a rumor he heard, which states that the decision is done through the ladder lottery. Essentially, the ladder lottery is a method of raffles specifically designed to create random pairings between 2 sets of things, people or commodities. The scene switches from the cafeteria to the special firearms shooting range. The big and burly Sergeant Minji is standing there barking orders, telling the soldiers to get into their bulletproof vests and be on standby as the training would commence in 5 minutes. Every single soldier in the room is gossiping, wondering what the special firearms test would be like. Yet, Minjun was just standing there minding his own business. Of course, he wasn't going to get peace for too long. A man dressed in uniform comes yelling that he's in the team with the newbie, looking at our hero. Well, it turns out that our hero was teamed up with none other than Corporal Guangshik that enjoyed hazing. He walks in, saying that a corporal and a private are worlds apart, boasting his own skill. Minjun is definitely taken aback by this, wondering why he had to team up with this guy of all people. He also realizes something from the annoying behavior that he hasn't learned his lesson and was still going to continue hazing. The corporal starts talking to Minjun, telling him that the average finish time in the squad is 3 minutes and that Minjun should aim to improve upon it. His face has a devious look as he says that Minjun must finish within 3 minutes or he's going to regret it, but Minjun simply looks at him without responding at all. This annoys the corporal, and he asks Minjun why he isn't replying, pestering him by saying that he's lost confidence and his 19 perfect shots were just a fluke. Minjun is internally frustrated, thinking about how big of a loss this guy is and that he was a lost cause. However, Minjun replies to him that he will try his best to make him shut up. The corporal doesn't care about that, though. He wants Minjun to just provide results, and he says if Minjun finishes later than him, he would die. He points at the squad, talking to Sergeant Minji, and says that he should observe the team going ahead. The 2 soldiers stand in different elevators, whereas Minji stands in the middle as he tells them to get ready. It's Kim Monggi in shooting lane 1, and Jong Han Young in shooting lane 2, and those 2 state that they're ready. Hence, they start descending. The special firearms training starts after a group of 2 members of the same team descend in separate elevators and are sent down to the underground facility. This tactical training taught soldiers to slay monsters while protecting civilian target plates in an enclosed area. However, in reality, it has mutated into a competition amongst the troops. There was a race now, and the whole purpose of the trial was to see who reached the end fastest and cleanest. The final objective was to press the finish button at the destination before your opponent. Minjun was looking at the large scoreboard to ensure he knew what was going on. Minjun then notices that there were different-sized monster icons on the board. Guangshik then explains to Minjun that it showcases the threat. The more dangerous a monster is, the bigger the icon will be. He begins explaining to Minjun the format of the special firearms trial. He explains that there are 2 monsters on each lane, and the encounters will be randomized. You will have no clue what you're getting into due to this format, and it will surprise you. In the lanes, we see a participant currently in the trial running into a rake toad, which is a large and powerful creature. The rake toad attacks him with its tongue but dodges easily, and he seems to have gotten unlucky in the monster selection. On the screen, we can see that the participant ran into the bigger monster ahead. Minjun realizes that even if he moved fast, he got unlucky with the monster. He knew that his opponent would catch up to him. Of course, the opponent ran into a large rat and shoots it to shreds. He walks away from the dead rat's body, confident that he'll have an easy time in the trial and win this easily. However, he immediately runs into a large earthworm, which is humongous in size and had many sharp teeth. Meanwhile, the guy who fought the rake toad was shredding it into pieces with his bullets, but he yells out wondering if it was for real since he just got another rake toad to battle. He is visibly frustrated after killing the second one by unloading a whole clip into it. Annoyed, he thinks that his opponent probably won already. But when he reaches the finish button, it's empty. There is no one near it. He walks over to it and presses it rapidly with a big smile on his face. The buzzer sounds, and the crowd celebrates as the challenge was completed in 2 minutes and 24 seconds by the troopers. The others discuss the sandworm thing and how it was a worm that had an all-out defense. The winner mocks the loser, saying how could he defend the nation at this rate. Meanwhile, the loser just complains about his bad luck, but the winner didn't care as it turns out that they had a bet, and now the loser must treat him at the PX on the way back. They notice that aside from being late, the loser had also shot a civilian, which disqualifies him. The two walk out bantering about what they will buy, and the corporal notes that the two had made a bet before going in. This catches Minjun's attention, and he's intrigued by the idea of a bet. Surprising the corporal, he tells him that they should make a bet too. He says that the loser should grant the winner anyone's wishes like a man. This makes the corporal laugh as he thought that Minjun was full of himself because the seniors were nice to him, but he decides to indulge Minjun out of overconfidence since he was his junior. He then says that there is nothing a mere private can offer him, but there is always something a man like him needs. He decides that Minjun will need to give him his salary for 3 months if he loses. Minjun is a bit disappointed to see that he couldn't come up with anything better than money, which is such typical simpleton behavior. He agrees to his condition, and the corporal is glad because he is confident in himself as he calls Minjun a tough bastard. Dongjin notices the two talking, and he starts getting a bit nervous for Minjun. Minji shouts for the next group to get ready, and Minjun and the corporal get into their separate elevators, ready to start the trial. Minji asks if they need to say anything before going in, and the two simultaneously deny. Minji notices they're ready and initiates the trials. The elevators begin to descend, and we see Minjun lost in his thoughts as he heads to the underground levels. He notes that he fell for the corporal's cheap provocation and is a bit unhappy that he made himself noticeable, as demonic energy began to leak from his fist. However, he is well aware that he's not mature and will never let provocations slide by. As the elevator doors open, his demonic aura begins to sense the demons in the trial. At the top level of the building, the other candidates are looking at the score screen and are excited to see the trial. They're talking about how the two candidates made a bet and are confused about how a private could possibly hope to win against the corporal and wondered if Sergeant Minju will end up rescuing him. Suddenly, all of them are shaken as the ground experiences a harsh tremor. It moves rampantly, and some of them lose their footing and feel fear before the tremor stops. The candidates ask each other if it was an earthquake. Dongjin says he doesn't think it was. They look at the screen, shocked to see that one of the huge monster icons was moving toward the other monster icon in one of the lanes. The door opens, and Minjun makes his way through the lane, wondering what that tremor was. His face is filled with confusion and instinct, and his eyes are wide open. It is a gigantic one-eyed monster with enormous claws and horns, devouring a large rat. It looks straight at Minjun. Minjun stares at the big dumb monster as he was confused as to why it was eating another monster. The monster sees Minjun present in the lane with its glowing purple eye, and Minjun looks directly into its big ugly eye with a chill expression on his face. The monster begins to rage, pulling the rat out of its mouth. It throws the rat at Minjun, but he jumps and dodges the hit. While in midair a thought enters his mind, he wonders whether the fried chicken is on the menu for dinner, and that he should get through this fast so he can go eat. He then notices the civilian target he's not supposed to shoot and realizes that he cannot shoot mindlessly. The monster takes a step towards Minjun and roars loudly in the air just as Minjun prepares to counterattack. He loads up some demonic energy in his left hand as he wonders why the creature is rampaging. The monster sends a powerful punch towards Minjun with its massive claws, but Minjun strikes with a fistful of demonic energy. It sends waves of demonic energy onto its arm and carves through the creature's arm, cutting through it with 3 precision slashes. The monster begins to scream out in pain as its hand is torn apart and dismembered. Minjun sees this and smiles, saying that it had finally calmed down a bit and that now all he has to do is shoot it down. However, his attention is caught again. The monster's arm begins to regrow right in front of Minjun's eyes, and to make things more interesting, instead of regrowing its hand, it regrew a giant blade in its place. The troops can see that Minjun is fighting a large creature on the screen. They're all confused about what's happening and wondered if there had been an accident or something. Minji is looking at this with his jaw dropping and has a revelation. If the first monster is missing, that means the second monster was the Cyclops. Cyclops are also known as devouring demons. Once it consumes a source of energy, its regenerative and attack capabilities increase drastically until digestion is complete, but Minji wonders if there was something weird. This monster doesn't attack unless its life is threatened, and he wonders what provoked it so much that it broke out of captivity and started raging after devouring the other monster. It was thanks to Minjun and the intense demonic aura that he carries around. With a smile on his face, Minjun was dodging the excessive slashes from the Cyclops. He found himself high up in the air, battling the overaggressive creature and calling it an active son of a bitch. He loaded up his gun, knowing it would be easy to kill it with his hands, but he'll indulge in the gun fun since it was firearms training. He began raining bullets at the Cyclops' face. The bullets tore through its eye, and the monster roared out in pain. Minjun landed on the ground as the monster was suffering and dashes towards it. Minjun notes that its eye isn't regenerating very fast, so he can end it now. The monster quickly turns its head towards our hero as Minjun is running towards it, ready to strike. The Cyclops retaliates by swinging its sword arm. He is taken by surprise. He notes that the Cyclops knows his location even after losing its eye and wonders if it could still see him or if it did it by sound. Minjun bends his back like Beckham and ducks out of the arm slash. The monster takes the opportunity to attack with its other hand and slams Minjun into the ground. But the Cyclops realizes that something was wrong, as Minjun had the strength to block its attack as he was holding back the monster from squishing him like an insect. He considers how strange this whole thing is. He talks about how there was no way that the training center would use a monster this violent for training, and even though he squashed its eye, the monster knows where he is exactly twice in a row. This is where he has the epiphany. Minjun then asks the Cyclops if it was reacting to his demonic energy just as a purple aura surrounds his body. The scene cuts to the elevator door opening. Within the lane, Minji walks into the second lane, carrying his incredibly large LMG and 2 katanas on his back while looking like Korean Rambo. He thinks of the situation as a catastrophe and wondered why such an incident had happened to a newbie. Minji then blames himself as an energy-fed Cyclops isn't something a private could go up against at all with their firearm. He runs through the lane as fast as he can, hoping Minjun hasn't succumbed to his death and hopes that he holds on a bit longer. Meanwhile, the corporal had a great time in the trial. He looks at his watch and sees that he was about to clock in at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, confident that Minjun never stood a chance against his speed. The corporal wonders what to do with Minjun's salary. He decides he will spend it on his vacation, but as he nears the finish line, his hopes and dreams are crushed. Minjun is already standing there, inspecting the finish button as the corporal yells at him, wondering how he was already here. Minjun looks back at the corporal with an incredibly calm expression before sprouting into a really devious smile and pressing the button. The corporal's reaction shows that his life is ruined, at least for the time being. Minji makes it to the place where Minjun fought the Cyclops. He looks at the corpse and questions how Minjun could have shot the monster for it to end up in the state that it is in. Everything above the monster's chest was so graphically brutally blown away into bits. The corporal and Minjun walk out of the elevator to cheering and applause all around them. The others show appreciation for Minjun defeating a fed Cyclops, as some of them thought it would end in an accident. Dongjin comes running in, asking if Minjun is alright. Minjun is glad to see his buddy and tells him he's not hurt at all. Dongjin asks him how he defeated the Cyclops, and Minjun tells him that it was all thanks to his teachings. Meanwhile, the corporal is fuming out of jealousy. One of the troops reminds everyone that this team placed a bet and that the newbie won. The corporal smacks him on the back of the head, threatens him, and tells him that it's an unfair situation and that the bet was off. He points to Minjun and tells the others that there was no way he could finish faster than the newbie. He tells them that the special firearms training was designed to beat 2 monsters in before reaching the destination, and he did defeat 2 just like the rules say. He then asks how many the newbie defeated and reminds everyone that Minjun only defeated 1 monster. He points at them and tells them it was an unfair situation as he too would have finished quicker if he only had 1 monster to beat, and tells Dongjin to say something too. Dongjin stuttered while trying to reply and felt a bit daunted by the question. The corporal orders him to say something and threatens him. Minjun thinks of the corporal as being one of the worst. He thinks about how, despite this scenario being unexpected, he doesn't feel good that he killed the monster with his fist, which was why he was planning to forget the bet. However, looking at him pestering Dongjin and behaving that way made Minjun wonder why he wasn't taking it out on him instead of Dongjin. Someone walks up to the crowd after hearing the commotion. The assertive voice mocks the corporal, saying that the newbie took the bigger risk and that the corporal should be ashamed. The corporal looks back and sees who said that. The mystery man reveals information about the Cyclops, saying they're harmless, but once they turn, their danger increases drastically. He tells the corporal that the newbie faced a much bigger threat, and everyone knows this. They're all shocked to see who said such wisdom-filled words. It was none other than Sergeant Lee Sung-ho. The corporal felt embarrassed and couldn't talk back to him. He then tries to mock Sergeant Lee, saying he was showing off his rank in front of the juniors. Sergeant Lee shuts him down, saying he's the one always showing off. The corporal tells him to stop embarrassing him with his jokes, and the sergeant decides to double down. He tells the corporal that everything that doesn't go his way becomes a joke to him. Sergeant Lee says that being a higher rank is great because he gets to embarrass stubborn donkeys like him. Minjun smiles as he now knows how things work. Meanwhile, the corporal is fuming red with rage. Sergeant Lee turns his head to him, seeing his reaction, and asks him if he has anything to say. The corporal brushes it off and says he doesn't. The sergeant tells him he's right, he doesn't have anything to say because he shouldn't. Leaving the corporal embarrassed in front of his juniors as he walks away. It's evening time. Dongjin and Minjun are standing outside, cleaning and conversing. They talk about Sergeant Lee receiving a double promotion. Dongjin tells Minjun that Sergeant Lee was a special case since he had the highest grade in the advancement exams. He continues telling Minjun that the 2-ranked promotion has now been made unavailable. It turns out that a staff sergeant who got it caused an accident in a dungeon. Sergeant Lee was the last case of this double-ranked promotion. Minjun wonders if there are ways to get special advancements, and Dongjin tells him that there are exceptions like rescuing a civilian during an emergency. There are also achieving outstanding accomplishments in a monster hunt, but they're all subjective cases. He tells Minjun to forget that the regulation even exists as there have been next to no hunters who have advanced with it. Minjun acknowledges that while realizing that subjective means the commander will have the final say. He's quite desperate for advancement at this point. He doesn't wish danger on civilians, but it's as if he's almost disappointed that it seems to be too quiet here, even though they said monsters appear at the border on a daily basis since the army of North Korea had been wiped out. Minjun then begins to think about how 2 days' experience was enough experience of being a private for him and that he wanted to advance already. Dongjin tells him that since he was doing well now he was sure he will be promoted soon, but Minjun wasn't paying attention to him. As they talk, Minjun wishes for a gate to appear, and just as he thinks that there is an alarming call all over the camp. The broadcast comes from the control center, shouting out that it was an emergency alert, informing everyone that a significant number of middle bat monsters have appeared at an oil reserve. They instruct all hunters to gather at the oil reserve immediately and install the protective shield. Dongjin tells Minjun that they're going, and Minjun has a huge smile on his face. Middle bats are child-sized bat monsters that live in colonies. Individually they do not pose a great threat, but they are especially agile. On top of it they can spit out fireballs from their mouths, so their appearance at the oil reserve might be the next 4th of July, as their attacks could lead to the whole military camp being blown away like fireworks. There are 2 soldiers standing guard at the oil reserve, and the bats begin to come at them, One of them yells out, wondering how many there were. One of the soldiers points his gun at the monster, but another soldier stops him from shooting, as they were not supposed to shoot near the oil reserve, and he tells him that they might start attacking if he shoots at them, and that could compromise the oil reserve. The soldier questions this decision, asking if he doesn't shoot, then is he just supposed to watch the monsters? The other soldier is smarter, telling him that they should observe since they aren't approaching. He tells him that since the bats haven't approached the oil reserve yet, they should observe the situation first, as the issue has also been reported, which means a squad with a protective shield is on its way. The soldier with the itchy trigger finger asks what happens if the monsters light up the oil reserve before the protective shield is put up, making his comrade feel super nervous. They imagine an incredibly huge explosion that would devour the entirety of the military camp, as if Christopher Nolan was filming here for the new Oppenheimer movie. They are mortified and start panicking, wondering what they should do and why the middle bats showed up there of all places. Finally, Minjun comes walking in, stating that he will draw their attention. They are surprised to see a newbie being this bold and asked if he was the newbie from the second company. He starts walking towards the middle bats, and they scream at him to fall back since he doesn't have any equipment, but Minjun ignores their calls as ain't nobody got that for equipment, while walking to the bats calmly with his hands in his pockets. He's looking at the middle bats as precious guests who will help him advance quicker. Not only will he get the title of the private who single-handedly stopped an emergency that could have wiped out the entire military camp, but he will also gain a ton of experience points. But how is that possible, he thought as he slowly unleashes demonic energy from his hand. He thinks of the Cyclops and remembers that monsters are attracted to his demonic energy. The middle bats definitely notice his aura and start circling around him right away. He smiles at how perfectly it worked out, as those bastards were definitely reacting to his demonic energy. He looks up and smiles, thinking that all the bats were now his. There's a squadron carrying a large crate rushing towards the oil reserve, yelling at each other to make sure that the equipment doesn't get damaged, but suddenly they come to a halt as Dong Jin is completely stunned, and soon the others were stunned as well. Sergeant Lee looks at the idiots just standing there and tells them to install the shield immediately. They are so stunned that they have trouble speaking. They eventually snap out of it and tell him that Private Kim Minjun is fighting all of the bats single-handedly without any equipment. Sergeant Lee couldn't give a damn and shouted at the recruits to deploy the shields as their private was drawing all of the bats' attention. Meanwhile, Minjun was just ripping the bats one by one as it screams from having their wings torn apart. He wipes his sweat and realizes that it's taking too long to rip them apart individually and wondered if there was anything useful. He hears Sergeant Lee's voice behind him calling him a crazy effer. Sergeant Lee is running towards him and telling him to lower his stance and fall back. He continues to yell at Minjun for doing what he was doing without a bulletproof vest, but Minjun ignores what Sergeant Lee said as he just wants all of those experience points. He notices that Sergeant Lee has a baton in his hand, and that catches Minjun's attention quite well as he thought of it as something fun. He uses his demonic energy on Sergeant Lee's stomach. Sergeant Lee doesn't realize it and thinks that his stomach is acting up. Minjun approaches him pretending to be worried about him. He asks to borrow the baton from him before taking it by himself and telling the sergeant that he'll be back in a moment. He activates the baton and sees electricity flowing everywhere. He compares it to an electric fly swatter or like Nightwing's weapon. Minjun's smile widens as he knows fun times are starting. He rushes back into battle with his shock baton ready to rip those middle bats apart. He's taking out multiple bats in one hit, and he's having an absolute blast in doing so. Sergeant Lee is just standing there, looking at him with an expression of pure unfiltered surprise. He realizes that Minjun is simply overpowering every single one of those middle bats as we see him destroying them. Minjun was now the monster and the bats were his victims. There are two soldiers carrying equipment, and they notice a bat flying above them. The bat was looking directly at the oil reserve with its face lit up as the soldiers could only stare at it from below. The bat has a nasty look on its face as it looks directly at the oil reserve. Its mouth is foaming with flames, and its eyes glowing red with violence. Sergeant Lee orders the boys to fire at the bat, and if something happens, he promises to take full responsibility. They are ready to shoot, aiming the gun at the flying creature. Suddenly, they stop and start staring in confusion up in the air. Behind the middle bat, Minjun appears with a smile on his face and the shock baton in his hand, telling it that if it plays with fire, you will get burned, and in one quick strike, he overpowers the bat. Electricity fizzles throughout the sky as Minjun's shock baton connects with the monster. Meanwhile, the squad below him is left wondering how he even got there, but what's more important is how high he had jumped. The troops then successfully install the protective shield. The shield is activated, and they all gather around it while collecting the middle bat corpses. Someone calls out to Sergeant Lee. He quickly looks back and salutes. The soldier with the armband then asks where the bats came from as they didn't detect them on the radar. He waves the smell away from his face due to the smell of the roasted bats, commenting about who barbecued them so well and how many were there. Sergeant Lee replies that there was 30 and thought of who this commander was. The commander was operations officer on duty called Captain Song Junshik. Even if he doesn't specialize in combat, it was not fine for an awakened executive to be absent during an emergency and show up only after it's been resolved. Sergeant Lee thought about how Captain Song was probably watching the monster radar from the control center. The captain then kills his chain of thought and asks him if he was the one to roast those bats and that he would make sure to tell the battalion commander, but Sergeant Lee tells him that it wasn't him. Song was shocked to hear that as he knew that it has to be someone extremely skilled with the electric baton. The captain asks for the identity of the valiant fighter. Sergeant Lee tells him that all 30 bats were killed by a single soldier and to report it as such. The captain is shocked. He cannot believe that every single middle bat was killed by just one individual. Minjun walks up behind them as they're talking and tells Sergeant Lee that he came to return the baton he borrowed. He's holding a broken baton with wires popping out of it. With a nervous look on his face, he asks whether the baton was really expensive as Captain Song and Sergeant Lee stare at him. The next day, the battalion commander asked Minjun to be honest. He questions him on whether he had re-enlisted, to which Minjun replies that he did not. The commander then asked if he was a regressor or something, but Minjun tells him no with a firm expression on his face. The commander with a serious face then tells him not to do anything rash like what he did yesterday ever again. He warns Minjun that he might have been lucky this time, but as a hunter, he would never know what could happen the next time. Minjun remains silent, thinking that it wasn't luck, but decides to keep his mouth shut. The commander then informs him that the Hunter Corps was a special unit. It was different starting from the scale of divisions since they only consist of 4 battalions each. The battalions themselves are also composed of significantly fewer troops than in the regular military. Minjun thought that it was obvious because not all the awakened kept re-enlisting, but he wonders why the commander was talking about it right now. The commander then asks a question to Minjun, asking him if he knew how all of this was possible. This question grabs his attention. With his fist tightened and his face firm, the commander tells Minjun that it was because every single person within the Hunter Corps is awakened. But of course, it doesn't mean that every member of the Hunter Corps would engage in battle. As there were quite a few officers who specialized in administration, monster theory, tactics, and weapons research. A familiar face came to Minjun's mind as he realizes that what the commander said was true. The commander then stands up telling Minjun that those who do office tasks were also awakened. And that in the Hunter Corps, you can only advance based on your accomplishments and talents. Minjun looks up to the commander thinking that they had called him to the battalion commander's office first thing in the morning, which he thought meant a good thing, but instead, he was annoyed as it turns out to be some sort of info session, and thinking that he should have kept his expectations low. The commander then looks at Minjun, asking him if he was anticipating something since he was called to the battalion commander's office. He then tells Minjun to keep looking forward, which catches his attention. A car is seen speeding along the highway with medallions presented on the front of the car. Meanwhile, the commander tells Minjun that the hunter who had defeated the most monsters in the 104th Division was going to visit their battalion. The car comes to a stop before its door was open. A combat boot is seen stepping out of it, and a huge man with a beard had appear with soldiers surrounding him while saluting. 2nd Battalion Commander Colonel Lee Junbiam is seen saluting and shouting out to the top of his lungs salute. A group of men is seen standing together in uniform precise who had looks of nervousness on their faces. The group comprises of 2nd Battalion 2nd Company Commander Captain Seo Jong-woon, 2nd Battalion Operations Officer Captain Song Junshik, 2nd Battalion 2nd Company 2nd Platoon Commander 2nd Lieutenant Kim Kielman, 2nd Battalion 2nd Company 2nd Platoon 2nd Squad Leader Sergeant Lee Sung-ho. A man gives Sergeant Lee Sung-ho a handshake. The man with the beard praises Sergeant Lee for calmly handling the situation yesterday. Sergeant Lee shouts out, "Thank you, sir." Minjun looks at the both of them and thought of Sergeant Lee being lively. He thought about how strong the 2-star from the Hunter Corps was. The man with the beard grabs onto Minjun's hand, asking him if he was Kim Minjun. Minjun immediately shouts out, "Private Kim Minjun, sir." "Yes, sir." Minjun was impressed by the grip strength of the man with the beard, as it was pretty strong. The man then slaps Minjun's back repeatedly with heavy hits and tells everyone to be at ease. They soon gathered in a room where he asks them if they had discovered which gate the middle bats had come from. The man beside Commander Du tells him that it was on a hill about 1.2 kilometers north of the battalion. They had restricted access to the area and are in the middle of investigating the gate's rank. Commander Du tells him that once it's confirmed, they needed to inform the division commander's office directly. He then looks at one of the commanders who was standing and asked him if he had mentioned that there was a problem with the radar. The commander tells Commander Du that the alarm had not gone off until the middle bats had approached the battalion and that it was confirmed that the equipment did not malfunction, but they were currently checking to see if there were any blind spots. Commander Du then tells him that since it might not be an equipment malfunction and must have something to do with the sheer numbers of middle bats, he then informs him to report it to the Divisional Ordnance Office and to set up 2 more radars. The commander then shouts at the top of his lungs with sweat dripping down his face, "Yes, sir." Minjun was laughing in his mind upon seeing all the commanders being so tensed and thought it was great. The commander then turns to Minjun to praise him for his efforts against the middle bats, but tells him not to forget about bringing equipment with him next time. Minjun apologizes to the commander but thought that if he had brought equipment with him, he would have burned down the base instead. The commander then approaches Minjun while telling him that it was a joke and that he heard rumors about him eliminating 30 middle bats. Minjun tells him that it was true. The commander was impressed with the fact that Minjun had reacted fast enough, which prevented the oil reserve from exploding. The other commanders in the room were glad to see that Minjun and the commander were getting along well. The division commander then presented a small gift to Minjun by replacing his rank with an improved rank. The division commander congratulates him for his advancement and informs him that under regular circumstances, he would have to go through various procedures, but a soldier who achieves an exceptional accomplishment should be rewarded as soon as possible. Minjun then thanks the division commander for the promotion. The division commander then tells the battalion commander to award Minjun with a vacation immediately for 3 days and 2 nights. The battalion commander agrees straight away, which surprises Minjun as he didn't expect to advance this quickly. And on top of that, he would also be getting a vacation, which brings joy to his face. His military life was getting much more exciting. Minjun was soon being led by his senior, who turns around to thank Minjun for his accomplishments, as even he was commended as well. Minjun thanks him for the praise, to which he then asks him what he was going to do once he got outside, as it was the first time he was going home since enlistment. Minjun started to giggle over the idea he had in mind upon going home. Minjun could be seen walking fast back into town. He looks up at a signboard with the words PC, as his plan was to play Dungeon Power Fight in the PC room. He grins widely as he knew that even when he went home it would be a restricted area, which meant there was no internet connection. He walks towards the PC cafe, wanting to spend the next 3 days and 2 nights here without wasting any traveling time. Just as he was about to enter the PC cafe, a man suddenly appears, calling out to his friend. He complains about the fact that the soldiers were being stingy about him entering a cave to collect some pine mushrooms in the area. He tells his friend to give him a drink, as he explains that he had already obtained permission from the owner of the mountain and had even deposited money. His friend tells him that another friend called Changxian had gone to the mountain before it had been restricted and heard him say that it smelled toxic all over the mountain. He wipes his mouth, stating that Changxian had a headache for a few days afterward and that he would be in trouble if he goes there. But the friend tells him that he would wear a mask when he went there. But Minjun interrupts their talk, asking where the place was. The 2 friends were confused to hear that from Minjun. A truck is seen on a highway 200 meters away from Wachin. A voice asks Minjun if he could find his way from here, which he tells that he could. He thanks the driver for the ride, who tells him that they couldn't even go further due to the soldiers. He then asks Minjun if he could really resolve whatever it was on that mountain. Minjun tells him with confidence that the restriction should be lifted by tomorrow so that they could go on the mountain again. The friends then took a closer look at Minjun's rank on his chest. They decided to trust him and wave him goodbye, telling him to be careful and not to tell anyone about them. Minjun agrees and tells them to take care. He then looks at the mountain, which was filled with a purplish aura similar to his demonic powers. He thought about how he had come to Watchin instead of going to a PC room and recognized the familiar scent. He smiles as he sees the purple aura swirling in the air. He knew that it meant there was demonic energy. Soldiers with gas masks were seen stationed outside a cave entrance while holding onto guns. Minjun is seen hiding amongst the tree and notes that the security was rather heavy near the entrance to the mountain but was quite loose near the dungeon itself. He then summons the demonic energy in his hand, wanting to avoid getting noticed since he had become a private first class. The demonic energy slowly creeps towards the soldiers guarding the entrance. They soon experience stomach aches together all of a sudden. They were surprised to see that both of them were experiencing the same thing at once. Since they both needed to urgently go poop, they decide to leave their post empty, knowing that no one would come to where they were stationed. Soon enough the entrance to the cave was empty but only had demonic energy laying around. Minjun quickly enters the cave while the guards were doing toilet duty. He smiles upon feeling the immense demonic energy. He places his hand on the ground to do some recon but soon realizes that he couldn't sense any monsters at all. But wondered why there was still demonic energy here. But he shows a grin as if he didn't care at all. An infinity logo is seen being made out of the demonic energy in his hands, which causes all the nearby demonic energy to flow toward him, allowing him to easily absorb everything. His demonic stats soon kept increasing by 1 point as time passes by. Soon a window appears above him, catching his attention. It states that since his demonic energy has reached the threshold, his skill called corruption has been enhanced. Another window states that since his demonic energy has reached the threshold, he had unlocked the skill called Night Walker. Minjun's face was filled with joy as he grins widely while staring at the notification window. Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.